Thanks, Mike, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to join you for the opening, and I'm sorry I can't stay for more of it. But this event, as you know, it brings together colleagues from across Imperial, from a wide variety of roles, to discuss innovation, educational practice, but also very importantly, and I hope you do take time to do this, to celebrate educational innovation and achievement across the university. Really impressive to hear how the conference has grown from, I think, a half-day conference not too long ago to now 3 days with keynotes, parallel sessions, and I love the fact there are so many student and staff panel discussions. But it's a real commitment to our entire community. What I love about Imperial, I must say, is that the collective ambition to make the world a better place, to use our knowledge, our discoveries, our technologies to make our world healthier, smarter, safer, more sustainable, and more prosperous. And through your efforts, let's celebrate for a second, through your efforts, I think Imperial is going really from strength to strength. And I'm just in my third year, so I take no credit for any of this. It is your effort. But Golden TEF, first in the most recent REF for research, quality, environment, and impact. Second, overall in the QS rankings, and top 10 in the sustainability rankings this year, just to name but a few accolades. And so hopefully you are all proud of what has been achieved, and it is such a collective effort. It is students, staff, alumni, it's the entire Imperial community and their efforts and commitment that has delivered on these. But what I also love about Imperial, and this really came across when we launched the conversation that led to our new strategy, was nobody is sitting on their laurels. People are really proud of the rankings and want to continue to be able to compete and collaborate in the very top league, but equally constantly challenging ourselves to ask, well, what's our next step in terms of our potential, realizing our full potential as a force for good in the world. And I hope that's captured in our strategy, Science for Humanity. As you know, and I hope you remember, there are 3 major themes there: enabling talent, powering research, and amplifying impact, and all focused on grasping or tackling the biggest challenges facing our world. No surprise that, therefore, that sustainability really crosses virtually all of those themes, and indeed all of the pillars of the strategy. I must say, I suddenly felt guilty coming in knowing the theme when I should be here with my either iPhone, which I can't see, or iPad, rather than having chopped down a tree for my speaking notes. So apologies right up front, but I think even preparing for this these brief opening remarks certainly caused me to reflect on my practices. But I was certainly delighted that sustainability was probably the theme during the strategy conversation that our entire community cared most about. And hopefully you'll see it reflected in the strategy. The Class of 2030, as a program that you're almost all involved in, has climate science literacy as an aim for all of our students, so they can advocate, they can influence, and they can lead and fight against climate change and its impacts. The Institute of Extended Learning, again, a big new initiative for Imperial, looking to provide individuals and businesses with the high-end skills that they need, and indeed to develop the business models that we need to deploy new technologies towards a net zero future. Our new School of Convergent Science, again, focusing on climate, energy, and sustainability, will provide a really important new portal for others to see what we do at Imperial, but actually creating a really exciting and vibrant, I think, community of scale to work together to develop new models to tackle the scale of the challenge facing us. We take our convening power, as you know, very seriously at Imperial. And again, I think we shouldn't underestimate, and I see this when I talk to civil servants or talk to politicians, the power of our on-campus deep dive climate science policy fellowships as something that's really valued within the policy community. And then the Imperial Zero Index and our socially responsible investment policy, which, as you know, we're different from probably the majority of universities in that we pursue an engagement for change ethos. There are different ways of doing this, but I think on balance, I think Imperial has chosen the right way forward in terms of how it engages with fossil fuel companies, as an example. And then finally, collectively, I'm just delighted the way our community is an advocate for technology and policies for sustainability, and has become the first, or one of the first universities to sign up to the Concordat for Environmental Sustainability of Research and Innovation practice, again in recognition of our ongoing commitment to sustainability. It's an opportune time to address our future in this unpredictable, uncertain, and increasingly technological world, and to think about how we can summon our considerable strengths as a force for good. Suitably, the theme, and I think, well, what a great theme for this year's festival, Science Education for Humanity, Pathways to Sustainable Impact. And the programme, and again, just to echo your comments, I think a huge thank you to all of you who have put together such a compelling programme. As you'll know today, the first day, the focus is on ensuring that students graduating from Imperial are able to apply their learning to tackle the most pressing problems that society faces. And these include biodiversity loss, climate change, pollution, poverty, economic growth, and challenges to democracy. A special welcome to Professor Stephen Sperling for joining us, Sterling for joining us from Plymouth. And I understand Stephen has a new book out. I think he told me that his wife instructed him this is to be the last book. But from what I hear, there'll be an appeal from this audience that actually may not be. But I'll let you negotiate that over the dinner table. And we certainly would not want to be responsible for any challenge to your marriage. But congratulations, Stephen, and thank you for joining us. Tomorrow the lens shifts to sustainability of our approaches to learning and teaching. How we can continue to meet institutional and higher education sector goals, providing high quality education and support for diverse groups of students. And then finally, day 3 brings together discussions to examine aspects of our institutional identity, ambition, and trajectory. And very importantly, those sessions explore who we are as a community and as a university, how we interpret and imagine ourselves as a force for sustainable global impact in a changing and unpredictable world. What does it mean to be an environmentally, educationally, and culturally sustainable STEM-focused institution? And what might that mean for our shared values and aspirations? So really, really meaty topics for you to get stuck into. Okay, just to go back to Mike's comments, a huge thank you to everybody in the EDU and the Centre for Higher Education Research and Scholarship for organising this event. You have very, very busy day jobs, but this is, I think, one of the highlights of the year, and the quality of the programme and the number of people who've shown an interest in the programme is a reflection of the brilliant, brilliant work that you've done. So a huge thank you for our entire community for putting together such a great programme. Thank you to all staff, students, and indeed our guests who are partaking in the sessions. This session is an opportunity for all of you to learn, share, and drive change together. And I think if this feedback I certainly got last year afterwards, it was that sharing across departments and across faculties, which is hard to achieve. All universities struggle with this. But that sharing of best practice and how you kind of together get into such difficult issues, whether that be over-assessment or student mental health or indeed staff mental health. These are really tough, knotty problems for you to get your teeth into, and the sharing of experiences across departments, I think, is probably the most valuable thing that will come out of this type of conference. So a huge thank you. I look forward to hearing the outcome of your deliberations. I'm really sorry I can't change. I, in fact, have to, as sustainably as possible, get to White City in the next half an hour, and I'll hand over to you, Mike, and best of luck with the 3 days. Thank you.
I have my tree here as well. So a few comments before I introduce Stephen formally. Having this is a really exciting opportunity, and an opportunity really to reflect back on sustainability teaching at Imperial. I started work here in 2008, and in 2010 we effectively had to beg the business school to teach on some of their programs. Fortunately, we had somebody who was very open to this actually in what had just moved from the management school to the business school. And then if you fast forward 15 years, we have pockets of excellence scattered through every single faculty. And we have some deep and interesting research that's going on, which you will all experience through the talks today and through the posters. So this has been driven by incontrovertible evidence or to the unsustainable impact of some of our practices, which you will hear about today, but also a realisation through that this is something that we need to consider far more urgently. And fortunately, Stephen has been doing this for 20 years. So we've been doing it for 15, sort of on and off, but only recently has there been a significant push. Stephen is here to hopefully share some of his experiences in how we can think about doing this. Stephen is the Emeritus Professor of Sustainability Education at the Centre for Sustainable Futures and Sustainable Earth Institute at the University of Plymouth. He was the head of sustainability education there for many years. He's worked in the environmental and sustainability education in academic and NGO fields for more than 4 decades, including a consultant advisor on UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development programs, that's ESD programs, and has an international reputation as a thought leader in sustainability education and is, as you heard, extensively published. His research interest is in ecological thinking, systemic change, and transformative level at individual and institutional scales to help meet the challenge of accelerating the educational and learning responses of the sustainability agenda and global crises. So, with that, Stephen, thank you very much.
Okay.
We will. Stephen's going to be talking for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open for questions.
Thank you, Mike. Okay. You have some water. Good morning, everybody. So, thank you for inviting me. I seem to have a bit of a frog in the throat. So yes, I'm an import all the way from Devon. It's my university's been doing it for about 20 years. I've been doing it for more than 40, so I'm quite long in the tooth in this area, but I have been working in it. Well, really, what is the relationship between sustainability and all the sustainability suggests and teaching and learning? And that's been my query for all these years, really. I've been working that out in all the engagements I've had one way or another. Now, listening to you and also my own background reading before I came here, it's clear that Imperial's doing a pretty good job already. What I hope to do is help you on that journey and take you further. So what I've got to say, it's kind of big picture stuff. It may be challenging, hopefully it'll be interesting, hopefully stimulating, but above all at some point useful to you. I've probably got more slides than I need for the slot I've got. but at least you'll have them, even if I have to not be able to talk to some of them, because I want you to have the whole package in a way. Okay, so so starting, for a long time I've been concerned with how far education and universities in particular are responding to global issues and crises which are increasing evidence and are already affecting communities everywhere. As you know, you have to look at the news to know that's true. My argument is that although universities, and I'm talking about worldwide here as well as UK, are responding to these issues, overall they're not sufficiently aligned to the realities of complexity, instability, insecurity and unsustainability, and the need for rapid socio-economic transition towards a safer planet and world. So I think there's a time lag. If I look back over the years I've been involved, I think there's a time lag between the rapidity of change in the wider world and the ability of higher education to catch up and respond to it. And I think a lot of universities are recognising that and going, actually we need to do things a bit differently because things are so rapidly changing in the wider world. So, and I'm not making huge plugs for Plymouth, but our process started 2004, I suppose, and it's quite new. I mean, we're one of the first out of the blocks on this, really. And a lot of water under the bridge has taken place. But, you know, I think as we work through, more and more people across the university, both students and staff, wanted to be involved in this project. And now Plymouth is doing quite well around the whole sustainability agenda. So I think we're in very interesting times, you know, internationally, globally. I think we're in a transition from the old story of indefinite, limitless economic growth, globalization, increasing inequality, individualism, and environmental decline, and trying to assert a new one, a new world, which is regenerative and life-affirming with well-being of people and environment at its core. So can we break through to a more stable world, or are we going to suffer some kind of breakdown this century? I'm not exaggerating. A lot of people think there could be some kind of social or economic or ecological breakdown at some point in this century, which is scary stuff. So universities have a role to make sure we actually transition towards a safer and more stable society and planet. So I'm going to give you a lot of ideas in the time I've got, which may be slightly indigestible, but as I say, I want you to have the whole package if you like. So just going ahead now. So that's my title, as you can see. And I'll try to make this clear as I go along. So this is a cartoon. I love cartoons for teaching and learning, by the way. It's just a great cartoon by an Australian cartoonist called Learning. And cartoons say a lot, really, which words don't always convey. So our way of life is being threatened by a dark force. We must defend our way of life. What is this dark force which threatens our way of life? It's our way of life. So there's a wonderful circularity there, which is all about unsustainability, isn't it? There are now increasing calls on people, governments, businesses, civil society to change course radically if we are to secure the future we want. So that begs questions for education. What is the role of education now in these circumstances? And it's surely to help create the future we want within planetary boundaries. A few years ago, I was involved with an interesting international network called the Great Transition Initiative, which asked me to write a lead paper on this theme of education for the future we want. And that gave rise to a whole debate, which you can see online if it's of interest. But it just typified the kind of debate which is now taking place, asking questions about what we do in education. So that's just by way of introduction. So the structure for the talk is fourfold: context and challenge, where are we now? Critique, what's satisfactory, unsatisfactory. Vision, what shifts are required. Design, going forward, how do we enact change? So starting with the first section, context and challenge. So I think context is everything here. You know, the wider world is beckoning us to respond to it, if you like. Now, let me make that clear if I can. So I started in this game a long, long time ago. People say I look young for my age. Maybe I do, I don't know. But that book, Teaching for Survival, does that work? No. I found that book in 1972, which is a hell of a long time ago. I went into Dillon's, I saw that book, Teaching for Survival. I thought, well, that's a title and a half, and I bought it. And you know it says on books, this book can change your life. Normally it doesn't. This one didn't either, but it just pushed me on further, if you like. I thought, okay, I'm going to go into education. And I think, you know, if that's a relevant title then, it's even more relevant now, 50 years later. This is the time, 1972, the limits to growth, the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment. You know, I remember all this stuff. And now we are years later. So this is now. And the debate's becoming more intense because of the issues are becoming more intense. And then going back again a few years, this is the update to limits to growth in 1992. That's 20 years after the limits to growth study came out. And I use this because Danilo Meadows, who sadly died some years ago, had this fantastic quote. People say, well, what is sustainable climate science? Well, that's it. It's one which is wise enough not to undermine its physical or social systems of support, which we're doing a pretty good job of now. You know, this is 1991. So, you know, we're in this situation now where this is Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, and he refers, to, as does the UN generally, to a triple crisis. These issues are wicked problems, they're systemically interrelated, and they present an existential threat to lives and society. It's not exaggeration, all the evidence is there. So, let's take it. How many of you have come across this term polycrisis? Can you indicate? And quite a few of you. So this came up some years ago, and it was adopted by the World Economic Forum, interestingly. So they produce a global risk report each year. This is the current report. And, you know, the diagram on the right is it. You know, this is how all this stuff is interrelated. And again, going back 50 years, the Club of Rome came up with the concept of the world problematique, about all these issues being interrelated. 50 years later, they're even more related. The knot is tight, and the issues are very apparent. So, how do we deal with this? Also from the World Economic Forum. Just catch up my slides here. So this is in the same report, and they indicate all these rather worrying issues which are coming up into the future. So, these are two reports I'd recommend. This is the UNEP Global Foresight report on the left, which is both gives some bad news, some good news. It's very up to date. And then the Global Tipping Points study from the University of Exeter, the Global Systems Institute, which poses this question you can see at the bottom, right at the front of their website. How do we achieve a flourishing future for a projected 9 to 11 billion people as an integral part of the life-sustaining Earth system? So these issues spurred Guterres to convene the Summit of the Future last September, international meeting, to try and forge a common purpose for the common good, if you like. But also at this meeting, it was a knowledge that the SDGs are badly off track. So we need to redouble our efforts, really. Now, if you take all of this stuff together, to me, it represents a sort of huge societal learning journey. And one of the key points I make when I talk, and I want to make today, is that formal education has a really important part, but in a wider context of societal learning. You know, the whole society needs to shift its ways to some extent to address these massive issues, to try and secure a safer future, which is daunting. So, you know, which future? Is it the left-hand side or the right-hand side? Towards rather experience breakdown, how do we ensure a breakthrough, which is, that's something Guterres talked about, a breakdown or a breakthrough, the choice is ours to make. So this begs, as I said, a kind of social learning revolution on a grand scale and in a relatively short period of time. So these are maybe the three aspects of that learning process: unlearning, relearning, and new learning, which I think formal education has a part to play, and that's the point I'm trying to make here. Okay, so interestingly, this is a slide from Monash in Australia. And they held a session, learning to accept responsibility, the priority for education in and out of times of crisis. What kinds of learning do we need to foster rather than undermine planetary health and community resilience? So I thought, well, fantastic, that's great. What is at stake if we don't accept responsibility, blah, 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 blah. Fantastic. But, although I'd have welcomed that, a little naughty thought occurred to me. I thought, well, if we're thinking that now, what have we been doing in the last 20, 30 years? If that's relevant now, what have we been doing which doesn't conform to these questions? It's a challenging question. So I talk about a term you won't find in the English dictionary, responsibility, which means the ability to respond to these issues. And I see that as an individual level and institutional level and community level. So, my question often is, what constrains universities and their members from responding adequately to the challenges we face? I think that's an issue for the whole sector. This slide is 10 years old, as you can see. And I think responding fully is difficult. It involves a learning journey. And also, as we know, universities have been shaped and limited, I think, by the marketised and competitive neoliberal agenda that's been dominant for the last few decades. That said, I do think universities are there's a lot going on which I take heart from. So I think this slide is not so relevant as it was 10 years ago. I think we have moved on to some extent. So onto the critique. What's satisfactory, unsatisfactory? Well, I'm just going to go back a second. I'm encouraged by the number of initiatives and events that seem to be, which are taking up the sustainability challenge. When I was researching my book, I came across all kinds of networks and initiatives I didn't know about. I thought I had a pretty good handle on the scene. And even yesterday, coming up on the train, I found a new organisation called the Planetary Health Alliance. Ever heard of that? Interesting. Sounds like something out of Star Trek, but interesting. Lots of universities have plugged into this thing called Planetary Health Alliance. Well, it's just indicative of these things popping up all over the shop, which I find quite encouraging. Students, as we know, are seeing sustainability as a key function of their universities. That study from Times Higher is a few years old. I imagine things are even more relevant along those lines now. And the Students Organising for Sustainability, which is a subset of the National Union of Students, has been doing this survey for 10 years or so, and always finding the same result, that 80% of students want their institutions to be doing more in sustainability, which is a driver for senior management, if you like. So that's good. Yeah. So the question I've been asking myself and everybody else for years is this: how should and how can education and learning be rethought and reconfigured to make a significant and central contribution to achieving a more sustainable and just world? But then over years I refined it. I think you need to go deeper than that. And this is my deeper question. What is the nature of the change of consciousness that appears necessary to achieving a safe, more ecologically sustainable and livable society in both survival and thrive? Yeah, so, and there's a lot of people, not just me, I think there's a psychological aspect to this. You know, we need to shift people's thinking. And a lot of people have been saying that for years, and even more so now. Okay. Now, interestingly, I think Mike mentioned I've worked with UNESCO for a long time, and UNESCO have been pushing education for sustainable development for decades. But they've also been talking about the need to transform educational systems. So that cartoon comes from their 2016 report, Education for People and Planet. And the quote there, we must change the way we think and act as individuals and societies, so education must change to create a peaceful and sustainable world, blah, blah, blah. And that quote from the Assistant Director General is interesting. We are increasingly asking, this is UNESCO, we are increasingly asking if what people learn is truly relevant to their lives, if what they learn helps ensure the survival of our planet. Good question. Discuss. And the green booklet on the right is their policy statement up to 2030. So this is their policy on sustainable development education, which is still current. That gave rise to this thing, the International Commission on the Futures of Education. Interesting quotes there. To shape peaceful, just and sustainable futures, education must itself be transformed. So this is a critical report saying not only does education need to make a positive contribution, but sometimes it's making a negative contribution, making things worse. So how do we make sure education policy and practice is not part of the problem, but part of the solution? And this is high-level stuff. You know, it's not just me. It's this international commission saying these things. This gave rise to another current UNESCO UN initiative called the Futures of Education, and that's ongoing. You can look all this stuff up online. And this gave rise to a big conference in Korea last December. And again, just read that quote in italics. It's interesting what's being said. So that brings me on to this section, the vision section. And I think fundamentally there's an issue about worldviews here. And I make a distinction, not just me, but many people make a distinction between the more mechanistic, reductive way that we see the world and the more ecological, systemic or relational way of seeing the world, which is now on the rise, if you like. And this is the second way is reflected in that book and others, The Future We Choose. And this one, Earth for All, which comes from the Club of Rome, which is an interesting book. And so the first book talks about the world we must create scenario. The second one talks about the Great Leap scenario. How do we actually make this shift societally? What they're arguing partly, and I argue this too, is depends on how we see the world, how we view the world. So this is another Club of Rome report. And this is the conundrum. How can we consciously change the way we think while we still think that way. You know, it's like a Zen riddle, if you like. And in a way, that's part of the issue here. And without going too far down this route, I think it's important to mention this. So I'm just going to illustrate it a little bit further. So this slide sets out briefly and simply, maybe too simply, these two ways of seeing things. The analytical or focused way and the more ecological, relational, holistic way. And this, interestingly, comes from a business school. This slide comes from a business school some years ago. In fact, it's 2010. And you know, we're very good at the left-hand side. So we've been doing this stuff for years, and it's perfectly valid. And we're great at drilling down, but we're not very good at casting wide. You know, this is the issue really, and we need to do both. And some issues need us to look more broadly and widely and look at pattern and relationship, rather than doing the drilling down, which we've been doing for years. And that's what this article was arguing. Part of the reason for that is complexity. We're in a position of hyper-complexity now globally, socio-ecological complexity. So this slide illustrates different stages of complexity, if you like. So there's a whole spectrum of problems of increasing complexity and what systems people call messiness. So, you know, at one end, if your toaster goes wrong in the morning, that's one problem. Climate change is way over the other side. You know, there's a whole spectrum of complexity. If your toaster goes wrong, you can fix it easily. The climate change issues, they're not fixable. You can improve the situation, but there's no problem. There's not a problem-solving approach you can take there. So different levels of complexity demand different approaches and different strategies for change. So, you know, I think that quite nicely illustrates the difference between tame problems and what they call messes. So, you know, as David Hancock argues, this entails some fundamental changes in what we think, how we think, what we teach, how we teach, and ultimately in the ways we organise ourselves. Now, there's nothing new about this in a way. I'm making it sound like it's new, but it isn't. So this slide, this quote comes from a book I used when I was doing my doctoral work years ago from an American guy called Banathy. And look at the date there, 1991. And just have a quick read of what he's saying there. You know, he's before his time. And I love that that cartoon where the teacher's going, look, you know, A causes B, and the person look outside and you know, messy world. It's not that simple. The linearity often doesn't apply. It applies sometimes, but often doesn't in situations of sustainability, which are often marked by complexity. So, without banging this drum too much, these are two ways of thinking. Some of my work, and from the left to the right. And that term, a shift of attention, I got from Fritjof Capra. He talks about we need a shift. It's not about abandoning the left-hand side, because it has uses at appropriate times, but we need a shift of attention to complexity to deal with these knotty issues, if you like. So what's this got to do with educational thinking and practice? This is my metaphor, by the way, from box thinking to web thinking, if you like. So effects on educational outlook. This is the bare bones of it, if you like. Yeah. So the importance of the worldview or paradigm which is dominant is that it affects how we see the world and our values and indeed education. So So if I look at this model next, which I developed some years ago, this model suggests that the deeper level are sort of fundamental ideas and beliefs influence our assumptions, which then influence our theories and ideas, which then influence our actions and behaviours. It's not deterministic, but there's kind of a bubbling up, if you like, and we don't often need to question our fundamental paradigm in every day. But it's the big stuff, really. I mean, in a way, the unsustainability of the world needs, we can dig up the lower levels and say, okay, this is still valid, the way we're doing this stuff. And this is work I've been doing for years, really. So if you accept that model as a useful model, that's what it is, it's a thought model, that's all I'm suggesting. If we accept that, then how does that relate to education? And it's like this. So, you know, the educational paradigm influences what we think the purpose of education is, which influences our policy, our provision, and our practice. So normally, policymakers don't think about, well, what's a deep paradigm influencing my thinking here? Just get along, change the policy, you know, without thinking too deeply. So, but if you, I think the crux of this is if we just put a few sustainability ideas into our teaching at the top, without changing deeper levels, there's not much systemic change in the institution. That's the relevance of this. So it's a bit like putting an eco house on unsupported foundations, if that's a useful analogy. So that brings me to the idea of purpose, because you know, from Danella Meadows onwards, lots of people are saying if you can change the purpose of a system, then the whole lot changes somewhere down the line. You know, it's a key point of intervention, if you like, to use systems terms. So if you go to the purpose, you know, what is education for? It's a pretty big question, really. I remember lecturing to an unnamed university in Scotland to 300 teacher trainers that just come to the end of their training, and I said, what do you think education is for? And the whole place was silent. And I think, well, you've done 3 years of work on education. You must know what you think education is for. And then one of the people put their hand up. Yeah, so yeah, it's an interesting question. So, I mean, traditionally, it's socialisation, it's vocational. The liberal humanist functions tend to be squashed by the neoliberal agenda, is still there. But the fourth one is a transformative one, which Hugh, you know, nicely reflected in his introduction. How can we actually make a better world? And that's quite a new idea, funnily enough. What I would argue is if we can get hold of that, we don't abandon the others, but they all become part of a greater enterprise. You see what I mean? Okay. So then back on purpose. I'm looking at the time here, Mike. What is the purpose of education? You know, how was it in the past? You know, when I trained as a teacher, classroom teacher, God knows how many years ago, it was very different from it is now. As it was, there's something in the past which is still valuable. We bring forward sort of liberal humanist tradition. As is, what is the purpose now? What does the government say it is? What did the last government say it is? As it should be, if you take this big context into account, and if you take what UNESCO is saying into account, what should it be now in these conditions? And what could it be? So, you know, what ideally we think it should be might not actually be practicable tomorrow. So what can it be, given realistic constraints? Okay, so that's for discussion. If you take this paradigm argument further, that's just a summary, maybe a crude summary, if you like, between a more reductive way of looking at education and a more open-ended, more relational way of looking at education. And it's not a matter of abandoning the left-hand side, but modifying it and extending that when it's too limited for the circumstances you're trying to study or you have inquiry into. Okay, so that's all well and good. One of the emphases now is, as I'm sure you know, is on competencies. What kind of competencies do graduates need in this world of sustainability, complexity, uncertainty, blah, 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 to make this contribution? And I was involved in this EU initiative called Green Comp. I was just one of many people feeding in our ideas. And it was a good piece of work. We did it all online, of course, over several consultations. And they came up with 4 categories of competencies which they feel are essential for sustainability literacy, if you like. And I think it's a useful piece of work. You can easily download it and get all the detail there. And I think that's applicable to almost any university situation. In my own work, I came up with a few models. I'll show you one which may or may not be useful to you. Opening up the space of critical and systemic thinking. So if you take almost any policy or teaching plan or curriculum or whatever, you can ask these kind of deeper questions, which expands the inquiry. And I think part of this is expanding, going beyond boundaries, and this is where there's a challenge to disciplines that see themselves as contained. You know, I think there's nothing wrong with disciplines, but they need to be able to be, I use the word permeable, permeable in order to have interchange with other ways of seeing the world. And these kind of questions are part of that opening up process, if you like. And still on this tack, there's a colleague in Australia called Richard Borden, who's been writing fantastic stuff for years. He's in his 80s now. And I've been inspired by Richard's work. This is his hand-drawn diagram. He's got a computer-drawn diagram, but I like his hand-drawn one. It's very him, really. It's coming up. This is what he calls the Hawkesbury spiral when he's working at Hawkesbury College in New South Wales. And he and his team recognise, this is something I was talking about earlier, that not all issues are the same. They have different levels of complexity and difficulty, if you like. And at the bottom, the easier ones, the tame problems, are amenable to reductive processes, strategies. And as you go up the table, it becomes more complex and involves ethical aspects and demands interdisciplinarity in order to get a handle on these issues. So he's saying, this is a spectrum of type of issue, a spectrum of strategies. And I think that's a really useful insight, which Richard and his team came up with, which then raises the whole issue of interdisciplinarity, which I think sounds to me, listening to Hugh and talking to Mike earlier, that you're beginning to get some traction on this, which is great. And I recognise that for my university, it's not exactly easy to do this because university traditionally are in the famous silos, and the work we were doing in our team largely was this. We were doing this lateral connectivity across the university for some years, really, bringing people together to see what would emerge. So just a couple of 2 or 3 slides on this interdisciplinarity, and then we'll see how that goes. So I'm sure you know this stuff. I'll leave these slides with you. This is a journey of increasing integration, if you like. So how do we do this without losing your disciplinary identity? That's an issue you have to decide. What structures allow this journey? This is just being clear, really, about this distinction between multi, inter, and trans, because people do get it muddled up. Sometimes just this grouping together, people say is trans, but it's not necessarily, unless there's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, if you like. And then So, I think it goes without saying that sustainability issues almost always need multiple perspectives in order to gain a clear understanding of the issue and how to go forward. It's not easy, common barriers, success factors or whatever. It can be done, but it's not that simple. I'm just going to find a quote here. So, we've had some difficulties and some successes at Plymouth. I think one of the best examples, I was external examiner on undergrad course on sustainable development at St Andrews in Scotland for 4 years. It's fantastic. They brought 12 different departments together to teach on the sustainable development programme, and the university was horrified to begin with because, what's all this interdisciplinarity going on? And they thought it wasn't, the funny thing, the university hierarchy thought it wasn't rigorous. Well, blow me, it's extremely rigorous to have students understand all these perspectives at once and integrate them together. And it's fantastic. Enriching but difficult. And they've got some fantastic coursework. I was looking at coursework which was at master's level from undergraduate students. And this is through an interdisciplinary programme at St Andrews. An old colleague of mine, I don't know about this, but he raves about the London Interdisciplinary School, which is a newish university, and they are consciously trying to create polymaths in their students, who are versed across disciplines. And a quote from them, the London Interdisciplinary School: "The current university system cannot evolve quickly enough, so we need a new solution." And that's what they're trying to do, which is an interesting experiment to watch, I think. Okay, going on. 5 minutes, okay. I'm going to maybe skip this one a little bit, but hopefully it makes sense. Okay, we're going towards pedagogy here, and I think this is self-explanatory, really. This idea of regenerative education is now coming through, which is all about defining and refining and elaborating and making relationships work better, really. So it is about relationships. Then the idea of resilient learners is coming through. Plymouth, I have to leave these slides because I'm running out of time a little bit. At Plymouth, we have a thing called the Plymouth Compass, which is going really well, where sustainability is part of an integrated package of broad attributes that we want students to go through their program and come away with, and that's been recognised nationally by the TEF, which is interesting. So just lastly, going forward, how do we enact change? Well, this is about the learning journey if you take a whole institutional response to this. And there's a lot of work going on with UNESCO and so on about the meaning and possibility of a whole institutional approach, if you like. So, it's a change over time. And what's interesting about this is it requires the university to be a learning organisation, which is not something they necessarily see themselves as being. And that idea of the learning organisation comes from business at school, but it's now needs to apply to universities. They're not just teaching research, but learning organisations themselves. That's self-explanatory, I think. I have to shift along a bit here. This is about organisational learning. We talk about the structured learning bit, which is fine, it's what we've been doing for years, but I'm emphasising we need the social learning within the university in order to be able to enhance the structured learning. So there's a double process going on here. Barriers to that are maybe familiar. This one's about depth of change as the learning journey takes place. which I think is probably self-explanatory. Mike's given me another 2 minutes or something. I'm nearly there. So, I mean, this response, the ability to respond depends on emotional engagement. You know, are you engaged? Are you inspired? Are you motivated to be involved? You need to be able to get it. You know, often senior managers don't get it. You know, I mean, getting it, understanding it is key. And then how do you do it? Those three things are necessary. At Plymouth, these are 20 things we found from 15 years' work. These are ingredients which worked at Plymouth. They may not be so relevant here. But you know, you need to work on these change facilitating aspects in order to make it work. This is our experience, if you like. I'm going to skip that one. You can read that for yourselves. Oh yeah, this might be a useful model. It's another one I produced some years ago. These all sort of helpful step-ups, if you like. And then coming to the end, this is a simple model which a lot of people have used, called the 4 Rs. Which comes from a thing called the Future Fit framework, which I wrote for the Higher Education Academy 2010, I think it was. And you still get it; it's still relevant. There's lots of advice in there, which you can look at should you wish. That's my new book. Quick plug. That's that one. I just happen to have a few copies with me if anybody's interested. And that's the last 2 slides. Believe in possibility. I like that one. You know, there's all to play for here, and a lot of it is it's exciting and positive, and you feel like you're doing something against the big issues out there, and making a better future. And then lastly, these are some really good websites, and because you're concentrating on SDGs, I put this report from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network up there. Which is a useful booklet, and my own website's down there in the right-hand corner. And that's that. So a bit of a gallop, lots of stuff there, and I hope it's been useful.
All right, I'm sure there are. Oh, Jeffrey, straight off the blocks there. Somebody want to okay. Jeffrey,
thank you, Stephen. That was really wide-ranging, and I'm sure people appeal to different interests in the audience. So, you know, what's the purpose of education? What's the purpose of university? How do we get institutional change? One of the things that your words about transdisciplinarity made me think of was a program we run here called Horizons. I'm looking at my colleague Alacosta Pereira, who, because Horizons is about getting particularly undergraduates to think a bit about outside their comfort zone, or about how to apply things they're learning to unfamiliar settings. And it made me think that perhaps your challenge about transdisciplinarity is precisely the way that we could implement Horizons for our postgraduate talk students. And Anna was asking me, what do we do about EGT Horizons? And maybe transdisciplinarity is the metaphor to play with. So that's one thing that kind of inspired me about your talk. There's one thing that didn't. I'm going to be very frank about this. And I'm looking at some of your websites, and I remember some of the things you said in your talk, and you mentioned Club of Rome, World Economic Forum, European Union. It just struck me how elitist all these organisations are. You know, and I think one thing that some of the resistance you sometimes meet, or the incomprehension you meet when you try and talk about these issues like sustainability and the future of education pedagogy, is people think, well, where is all this coming from? You know, who were the people in the room who decided what the 24 goals were, or the 7 principles, or the 8 old conceptions and the 8 new conceptions? I think we do have to be wary in this field if we want to persuade and convert people and bring them on board, not to make it look like an agenda that's been set by global elites sitting around green-based tables in towns like Zurich or Strasbourg. So one positive and one negative I took away from your talk, which I think was very provocative. Thank you.
Did you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. There's a lot that I'd agree with, I think. One thing I would say is that it's the role of universities to engage in critical thinking, critical thought. So if not in universities, then where? So what I wouldn't want this to be seen as is an agenda coming from on high that you have to do in sort of unquestioning way. I think everything's up for critical debate. I take my hat off to UNESCO because if it wasn't for them, this debate would be probably 10 years behind where it is because they've been pushing it. But I'm also critical of UNESCO. I think they've got something wrong. If you buy my book, you'll find out why. You'll see what I said about that. So it's double-edged. Well done to UNESCO for putting this agenda out there, but not so good in some of the assumptions and some of the things they're saying about it. Also the SDGs, people, this sort of delivery culture, this goes back some time. Teachers, particularly, not so much lecturers in business schools, they take frameworks and say, oh, that's it, is it? Then we'd better teach it, without actually questioning it, And that bothers me. So SDGs should be questioned, And also the other issue about SDGs is that universities sometimes think, well, I'll do SDG 3, you can do SDG 7, and it becomes reductionist again, So what has 3 got to do with 7? That's the questions, some of the questions that need to be asked. But the framing of them, that has been critiqued quite a bit, but then it's part of the university's job to look into that critique and see what you think and what your students think. How could that put it? I mean, I don't want to go on too long, but when they first came out, in fact, before they came out, I was involved in part of an international working party to critique the draft before it went out. And I was quite critical of SDG 4 about education. I thought they only half got it right. But they ignored me and went ahead anyway. That's another story. Yeah, anyway, but thanks for your comment and question. Yeah.
4 questions. Please.
I wanted I would like you to go deeper into complexity, because as you were saying, a change of institutional and educational culture involves, first of all, a change of paradigm, and you're pointing towards complexity, and if you could say a few more words about it, how we can achieve this shift in paradigm.
Well, okay, how to do that in 3 minutes? It's a massive question, It's a massive question, and my doctorate, which I wrote years ago, is all about that. Really, it's actually about bringing together. I wish I had more time, really, but to me, and the work I've done is about bringing together systems thinking or systemic thinking with ecological values. Because the problem with systems thinking without ecological values is it can be used for ripping off the world even more effectively. So if you put sort of caring values in there, then it becomes a greater whole, if you like, the basis of a different way of seeing the world. There's so much work going on this now. But what I try to convey here, very briefly, is part of the issue is becoming cognizant of the way we think and value already. So that's pretty tricky. It's, I think in many meadows it's like pulling out the rug from under your feet, in a way. The way I represent it by a flip chart is like a circle. We're inside this circle of this broad here. We need to find a way of being sufficiently reflective to step out of it and look back on it. And that's not easy. But I mean, there's so much work going on explicating what a more relational worldview looks like. There's a lot of compared to when I was looking at it 25 years ago, there's stacks of stuff out there now, which I find encouraging. It's a matter of engaging with it, really. And what I'm also trying to say is our reductive and mechanistic traditions are not invalid. They are absolutely fine in the situations to which they are best suited. They're not so fine if you're trying to deal with socio-economic and ecological complexity, because we're using the wrong toolbox, basically. So that's one of the key points I'm trying to make. So we need to be cleverer at having appropriate strategies for the kind of issues we're facing. Yeah. Does that help a bit? Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions? Maybe I can ask one. At Plymouth, you've been doing this for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
We're just starting.
Yeah.
What's the biggest pitfall we need to look out for?
Okay, so one of the early pitfalls is we were lucky all those years ago having some decent funding from what was then the Higher Education Funding Council, and we used some of that funding to buy people out, which is a bit of a luxury, really. So we had what we called 40 centre fellows from every department and faculty right across the university coming together, which was exciting for them, to health professionals, to talk to engineers, to talk to scientists and the rest of it. But a mistake we made was a little change agency we had within the university, which I was a member of, is assuming that a specialist engineer or health professional or architect interested in sustainability could teach about it. So they weren't familiar with sustainability pedagogies, the kind of things I was putting up here. So we had to help them with sustainability pedagogies, and then the whole thing flowed a lot better. So that was a major aspect of the change. I mean, the other key thing is to make sure the policies from behind us, from on high, are supportive of the work going on, because your less persuaded colleagues need that kind of endorsement in order to be part of the team.
Great, thank you. And on that note, we'll wrap up this keynote session, and we have the parallel sessions starting off. We have a poster session at lunchtime. We don't yet know whether the posters have arrived, but they will be here hopefully sometime.